Hey guys, today we're going to go over the different categories of tea. So I've actually brewed them all for you today. You can see a beautiful tea rainbow here from light to dark. So we have white tea, green tea, oolong, black, and puer. But just before we get into that, I want to first talk about the one fact that sort of blew my mind when I first started learning about tea, which is that all of these teas on the table have actually all come from one plant called the Camellia sinensis. So with tea, the differences in the flavor profile mainly comes from the processes which are applied to the leaf after they've been plucked, as opposed to the leaf itself. So we have Camellia sinensis to thank for all the different kinds of teas that we have, whether it be like a malty black tea, a floral oolong. You know that all of your teas have come from the one plant. So I'm just going to kind of dive into the different teas we have. So we've got a white tea, and then a green tea, and we have an oolong, a black tea, and a puer. So starting with the white tea, most white teas are made in Fujian, which is in southeastern China. Today I've brought a white peony that has been made in Fujian. You may have heard of the most famous white tea. It's called Silver Needle. So this is quite a similar tea to that in that it's a lot of delicate buds that have been picked. So I'm just going to show you the leaf so you can have an idea of what it looks like. And the reason that white tea is called white tea is because of there's a furry layer that kind of surrounds the leaf that's there to protect the baby leaf that's picked very early in spring. So that's where it gets its name from. And you can see the liquor, the color of the tea itself is very light. Okay, so we're going to give it a try just so you guys can understand the flavor profile of white tea. Right, so it's very light and delicate, but there's a lot of like subtle nuances to it. It's got a really nice lingering sweetness. It's very aromatic. And this one also has quite a fine muscatel grape-like aroma as well. It's really, really nice. It's actually one of my favorite teas. Okay, and then next we have green tea. So common green teas there's quite a lot of green teas from Japan. So you might have heard of like matcha, genmaicha, hojicha. Those are all green teas which have been produced in Japan. And there's also a lot of green tea produced in China. So the one that I've brought today has been made in Zhejiang province, and that's also in southeastern China. I'll just give you a little look at the leaf again. So it's quite a fine green tea, and it's sort of been curled. That's the shape of this one. And also, if you drink a lot of jasmine tea, that's usually a scented green tea. So you might be drinking a lot of green tea without knowing it. So let's have a taste of this one. So it's quite grassy. It's also pretty savory, which is typical of a green tea. But because this one is quite a delicate and fine green tea, it's also got like a kind of sweet note to it as well. Okay, and then the next one we have is oolong tea. So some famous oolong teas you might have heard of include Da Hong Pao, Big Red Robe, or Tie Guanyin, Iron Buddha. And the one which I brought today is Dongding Oolong, which comes from Taiwan. And it has been rolled into these little balls. So this is quite typical of a Taiwanese oolong tea, where they roll them into like tight pebble shapes. And you can see from the color of the tea itself, it's kind of sits somewhere in between the lighter teas and the darker teas. And that's to do with the fact that it's semi-oxidized. So green tea is non-oxidized, whereas black tea is fully oxidized. And oolong sits somewhere in the middle, being semi-oxidized. And that's why it has its nice kind of in-between color. Let's give it a taste. Oolong teas usually exhibit, it's actually a very diverse category of tea because it's semi-oxidized, so you can have a very lightly oxidized tea versus a very dark oxidized tea. So the flavor profile can differ quite a lot, but some typical notes you might get are like floral, fresh, but you can also get like quite nutty, caramel, things like that. So let's give this one a try and see how it tastes. Yeah, that's pretty nice. So it has that, yeah, it definitely has like lingering sweetness of oolong tea. But it's got a definite, like, immediate kind of caramel nuttiness to it, and that's to do with the fact that it's been quite highly roasted. And then there's also a bit of a floral note in the backdrop, which is typical of oolong tea. Okay, and then next we have black tea. So black tea is probably the tea which you've consumed the most, or you might have heard the most about. If you drink tea in the mornings, like breakfast tea, English breakfast, that's a black tea blend. And Earl Grey as well, that's a black tea too. Or if you like lemon tea, that's usually black tea and lemon together. So you can have a look at the leaf. This one that I brought is a Sri Lankan tea. So it's a nice Ceylon tea. You can see it's been cut. So as opposed to the other teas which were whole leaf, this one has a cut to it, which is also quite typical for black tea. Okay, now let's give it a taste. Yeah, so it definitely has like a very strong flavor, and that is why people like to drink it in the morning. It's got that strong kick of caffeine. It kind of wakes you up, gives you that energy boost. It's got a nice full body, and it's got typical black tea notes of like maltiness, but this one is quite citrusy as well, which is typical of a Sri Lankan black tea. Yeah. And then the last tea I have is a Puer. So the one which I brought today, it's a ripe Puer. There's two kinds of Puer. There's ripe and raw, but today I have the ripe one. And you've probably seen it if you've ever eaten dim sum. Usually at dim sum restaurants, Puer is the tea that will accompany your dim sum. And that's because it helps you digest all the greasy, fatty dumplings. So yeah, you can see from its color it's very dark, and that's because it's been fermented after being oxidized. And all Puers are made in Yunnan, southwestern China. And then you can have a look at the leaf here. So you might notice it's in like giant chunks. That's because I've broken it off of a tea cake. So they actually compress the leaf into a cake, and then I've just broken bits off of that, which is also typical for a Puer tea. Yeah, so let's try it. Let's see. Yeah, so it's, as most Puers are, ripe Puers at least, it's very earthy. So some people like it, some people don't. I really like it with my dim sum. I think it's a perfect match. But yeah, it's got that earthiness, and this one also has a little bit of like a sugarcane sweetness to it as well. So there you go. There you have it, all the 5 kinds of tea. Also, I do want to note that there's a 6th category called yellow tea, but because it's more rare and less is known about it, I won't be covering it in this course. But yeah, just by starting with these 5, you should have a pretty good basic understanding of the different kinds of tea. And lastly, I just want to make a note about herbal teas. So if you like to drink things like peppermint, chamomile, rooibos, all those non-caffeinated drinks that you can drink at night before you go to sleep, those are actually not teas. Although a lot of people call them teas, we call them tisanes, which basically means any herb or botanical that you can drink in the style of a tea, but doesn't actually contain any tea leaf in it. So yeah, so there you have it, all the different categories of tea. I hope that you've kind of learned a little bit more, and next time you drink tea, you can try to identify which kind it is. Thank you.